Hello and welcome to Let's Knit Together. And today we are going to be talking about something that Julie's been itching to talk about, which is what you have in your basic knitting kit.
Yeah, I'm completely mad about buying kit for things and, budget permitting, of course. There's such a lovely array of things here and I feel like a kid in a sweet shop. Talk me through them, Nettie.
Yes, I've been delving into my knitting kit to bring out some of the most useful things because, it's like a piece of string, isn't it? You could go completely mad and buy all sorts of things, but what do you really need? So
what are the basics?
Yeah. So obviously we need knitting needles. Now, most knitting needles are straight, as is ones we sort of mainly demonstrate with. And I've got a selection here. So I've got some big plastic ones. So these are a size 15. These are nice and light, which is, if I was doing a big sort of project, you don't want, if you've got heavy yarn, you need light needles. And they come in different lengths. So these are, 30 centimetres long, and they kind of get down to 20 centimetres long, 22.5, I think it is. There are some standard lengths that needles come in, and you can have them in plastic, wood, bamboo, even all the way down to these skinny little steel ones. And these are 2 1/4. So, so that's for like your lace knitting and very fine knitting and things like that. So,
and what about, Nettie, vintage knitting needles? I love the colours of old vintage knitting needles from charity shops.
Yes, we've got some really lovely ones.
But they often don't have the sizes on them.
No, that's a really good point. And actually, I brought along one of my needle gauges. So this is just a really straightforward piece of equipment that's really handy to have in your kit, actually. And most of it's pretty inexpensive. And how that it works is, say this was one of my vintage needles and I didn't know what the size was. The size had been rubbed off with age or everything. This has got the different sizes of needles, holes actually cut through the plastic. And so you would just sort of test your needle. And if it's a perfect fit down through the shaft, so no movement, that's what your needle size is. So that's a little bit loose. And this is perfect. And it goes on the shaft size. And so that said 5.5. This still happens to have the size on, 5.5. So now I know what my needle size is and if it's right for my project.
Right.
And also it's got a handy sort of measure on the side. I'm pointing at the inches, so whether you're in inches or centimetres, which is again really useful for your tension square. So when you've got your tension square set out, you can just quickly look up what your 10 centimetres, how many stitches there are. So a handy piece of 2-in-1 kit, I think. So that's a needle gauge. You can also knit in the round, and if you're knitting in the round, or in fact very long pieces, you're going to want a circular needle. So a circular needle this is like a sort of fairly traditional one where you've got 2 needle points joined by a cord. And so that's really useful if you're knitting a long bit of a jumper or a scarf or something like that, or a shawl. And this has got metal tips. So that's going to be nice and fast. More recently, there's been a move to sets where they're interchangeable. So you have a set of cords like this with needles that screw on and screw off. So I happen to have
how convenient.
Yeah, these are great. So in the kit you might have 20 centimetre cord for mittens and things, all the way up to something like 100 centimetres, which is fantastic size, a metre length of cord to work with. And they literally just screw on and screw off. And so I could change my other size and I would go from having a 7mm circular needle to a 3.5. And so the final sort of needles we're going to look at very quickly is double-pointed needles. So these are very useful for socks or small circumferences. And in fact, you might start off on double-pointed needles for hats or socks. And again, like everything else, they come in different sizes. So these are very chunky, these 6mm ones, and these are much finer. Oh, crikey, what are these? 2.5s or something, So, and again, your needles, your yarn dictates what needle is best for your project. So this would be for fine yarns, this would be for chunkier yarns, and your pattern will always kind of tell you. But so depending on I think a 4mm needle is quite a good one to start with, because that's DK, and DK is a very popular and common yarn, or Aran, which kind of is more like a 5mm needle.
You know, it's just suddenly occurred to me, we've spoken about people who love buttons and collect buttons. I'm sure there must be lots of people who collect knitting needles. Do you have any particularly beautiful needles that have got a story behind them? If so, send in a photograph.
Tell us your story.
And the story, we'd love to share it with everybody. It'd be really nice. Okay, so we're moving on to this.
So needles, when you're knitting, obviously you need a pair of scissors, and a pair of embroidery scissors is quite handy just for snipping and getting into small spaces where your big kind of chunky scissors would really be a bit too cumbersome. So a pair of nice small scissors is really useful.
Does the rule of not using scissors to cut paper or hair and things apply to the little...
Absolutely.
Oh, God.
No sharing of the scissors, for sure.
My mum was a dressmaker, and she had the most beautiful, big sort of tailor's scissors. And she once caught me, cutting some paper up. Oh, it didn't go down well.
My husband's under strict instructions. In fact, I test him sometimes and say, which scissors are you not allowed to use? Not allowed to use those ones. The ones with the ribbon on. But a small pair of embroidery scissors is really handy for snipping ends and tidying things up that way. A row counter, if you've got a big project or, a complicated project, you need to keep track of your rows. You get these little swizzly type things. I tend to put mine on the project yarn just so I know which one it is. I've got a couple of things on the go.
Yeah.
But you can get apps for that. You can get
No, this is the nicest way.
I suppose knitting's a physical thing, isn't it?
The traditional way.
A longer tape measure. So I've got this little one here that I ravel and unravel frequently. Then a good old darning needle with the blunt end and the big eye for weaving in. And again, some needle stoppers. We talked about needle stoppers for the circular needles. And these are, again, just ones you can buy in different sizes for different needles. These just kind of pop on the end of your needle tip, and then your stitches won't slip off in the night with the elves.
Such a simple thing, but so invaluable. It could waste a whole, evening or week's work.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to think about that. No. So stitch markers. If you've got a project where you've got a section of pattern that is either lace or a cable and you want to mark it out so that you don't have to kind of keep counting your stitches all the way along. So, for example, I've got this circular pattern that I'm just starting, and I put my stitch markers in over the wire so that I know that my big chunky cable is going to go in here every time I go, and then you just move them up as you work. So that's that. So stitch markers are also quite handy if you drop a stitch and you just need to secure it as well.
Definitely.
Before it runs.
Invaluable.
Talk about invaluable. So yes, a crochet hook. Generally, a medium-sized one will do the trick unless you're working with very fine yarns, because it's usually a size or two smaller is good for the type of knitting compared to your knitting needles. But also you need it occasionally for casting on certain cast-ons and that kind of thing as well. So crochet hook's really handy to have right by your side.
Or doing beadwork, like we've spoken about in one of the videos.
Yeah, definitely.
Lovely intricate beads.
Yeah. And then some of the other things really are more to do with the type of knitting that you want to do. So, I mean, this is actually a blocking mat. I've got this laid out on a blocking mat. And this is when you want to pin out your garment and make it the right size. If I just hold that up like that, so you can sort of see it's quite a big chunky mat, and it interlocks together with another piece if you need to make a bigger section, like so. So if you've got like a sleeve or, you can put these together as many as you like. Now, you don't have to have a blocking mat. You can use your ironing board, or you can make your own with some wadding over some MDF stapled down. But the thing about them is they've got grid lines on them which help you to map out, and keep lines straight.
And if you're going to get your sort of yarn wet at all with blocking, this is better for it than doing it on your ironing board, for instance.
Definitely, for sure. And also when you pack them away, they're nice and easy as well. You can just pack them away and put them away.
And I love the fact that they are interlocking like a jigsaw.
Yeah, and also they take the depth of your pins. So these are a couple of different types of pins. So this T-headed pin is very good for lace work because you can kind of weave it under or over your lace at the edges, and the T-bar kind of keeps it flat. But I also quite like these called fork pins, which have got 2 prongs on them, so you kind of grab 2 stitches at once rather than just using sort of ordinary dressmaker's pins. And they also need to be sort of stainless steel or rust free.
Of course, because they're getting wet.
Yeah, they're getting wet, and you don't want them to snag or mark your lovely knitting. And you know, they do need to be quite strong as well. These T ones are really sturdy, but I guess that's and that's another thing about the blocking mat, is that it can actually take the pin going into it quite a way if need be. So, and then another thing is that if you're making up garments, you're going to want to pin things together to start with, potentially. Now, you can use your stitch markers for pinning things together, or just dressmaker's pins, but actually these clips are quite useful for just layering up 2 pieces, and if you clip all the way along an edge, you can line it up there. They've got a really good grip.
Really, I was playing with those. They're really sturdy. They're wow.
So they're very handy as well for when you're trying to hold pieces together, or even if you want to kind of leave something for a while and you don't want it to move. So.
And they're nice and dainty too.
Yeah. If you want to do cables and twisted stitches, then you're going to need this cable needle. Okay. Yeah, that lovely sleeveless top there. So the twists in that is a very straightforward cable, but for when you work a cable, it's good to have this cable needle where you slip certain stitches onto and they hang outside of the work, and then you knit other stitches and you bring them back so the stitches actually move position, and this cable needle just keeps them out of the way. So if you think you're going to be doing a lovely cable scarf or something, or a lovely top like that, you're going to want one of those. And then finally, if you like colour work, if you want to work with intarsia, where you are putting blocks of colour within other sections of colour, so a bit like an island of colour in an ocean. And we've got a lovely pair of dungarees, a lovely pattern with dungarees with a little starfish shape in. So if that's the kind of thing that you think you might want to make, then you may want to be putting your yarn on bobbins, just to kind of hold at the back.
Or a little dress.
Yes, or a little dress. Yeah, so they're for little sections of colour, and they just hang at the back of your work. This little fishy thing which might make you smile, or just a regular one. So if you like the idea of that, then that's it. The other thing that's really handy are these stitch holders. So they're like a giant safety pin. They come in different sorts of designs, and you just slip your knitting onto them if you need to use the needles for something else, or for example, if you're working a sock and you need to move some stitches off needles to work on a certain section. And yes, you definitely need some of those in your knit kit as well.
Can I add one more thing? That I'm very partial to a pom-pom. Love pom-poms.
Yes, put them in the kit.
I would vouch for that being an essential. Oh, and a bag.
Oh, a bag.
I'm ready to go with my stash bag.
Oh yes, Julie's got her needles, and yes, that's a really good point. Stash. Actually, you you need to have a project bag, really. But why not knit one? There are plenty of lovely patterns where you can knit your own bag, or in fact, any kind of pouch for your bits and pieces to go in.
Great idea.
So there we have it. So that's the essentials. Now, the other thing you might need, once you've got all of this lovely stuff, is something to put it in. Now, you could have a very nice smart box, but I like my old chocolate box that just so happens to fit my needles in.
They must have been some chocolate.
They were. How about that?
Perfect.
And now we're all set.
Fantastic. Hope you managed to get set too. And don't forget, send us any of your favourite pics of any of your favourite bits of kit. See you soon.